the vanishing path. The Appalachian Trail, renowned for its breathtaking vistas and diverse wildlife, has also earned a reputation for its more sinister tales. Seasoned hikers share stories around campfires, whispering about the eerie experiences that have befallen some who dare to tread its ancient paths. Among these stories, none is more chilling than the tale of the vanishing path. It was a foggy autumn morning when Sarah and her friends set out on their long-anticipated hiking trip. The group had been planning this adventure for months, eager to escape their daily routines and immerse themselves in nature's tranquility. Little did they know, they were about to stumble upon a forgotten chapter of the trail's dark history. The hike began smoothly. The crisp air invigorated them, and the vibrant fall colors painted a picturesque landscape. As they ascended the trail, laughter and conversation flowed freely. Hours passed, and the group reached a dense section of forest where the canopy overhead blocked out much of the daylight, casting an ominous shadow. "Let's take a break," Sarah suggested, pointing to a small clearing just off the main path. They settled down, munching on snacks and sharing stories. Amid the light-hearted chatter, an old, tattered sign caught Sarah's eye. Partially obscured by overgrown vines, it read, "Beware the vanishing path." "Hey, look at this," she called out, curiosity peeking in her voice. Her friends gathered around, intrigued. Probably just an old legend. Mark, the most skeptical of the group, dismissed it with a wave of his hand. You know how these trails are full of ghost stories. But Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Something about the sign felt wrong. Chapter 2: The Descent into Darkness. Ignoring their unease, the group decided to press on. They followed the trail deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the light dimmer. As the path narrowed, an eerie silence enveloped them, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Suddenly, they came upon a fork in the trail. One path was well-trodden, while the other, barely visible, was overgrown and seemed rarely used. A small, weathered marker pointed to the overgrown path with faint, barely legible letters, "Vanishing Path." "Should we check it out?" Sarah asked, her curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. "Why not?" Mark said, leading the way. "It's probably just an old shortcut." Reluctantly, the others followed. The vanishing path was narrow and twisted, forcing them to walk single file. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, swirling around them like ghostly tendrils. The forest grew eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing. At the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches stretching out like skeletal arms. Strange symbols were carved into its bark, and at its base lay a weathered journal. Sarah picked up the journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully, revealing scrawled entries detailing the experiences of past hikers. The final entry, dated over 50 years ago, sent a chill down her spine. "We are lost. The path has vanished, and the forest is closing in. If anyone finds this, beware the vanishing path." Chapter 3: The Haunting. Panic began to set in as the group realized they were lost. The trail they had followed seemed to dissolve into the forest, leaving no trace of their route. Desperation drove them to search for any sign of the path, but the fog obscured their vision, and the forest seemed to shift around them. Hours passed, and the once friendly woods now felt like a labyrinth of nightmares. Shadows danced in the corner of their eyes, and whispering voices seemed to echo from the trees. Every rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. "We need to stick together," Sarah urged, her voice trembling. "We can't afford to get separated." But the forest had other plans. As night fell, the fog thickened, and the group found themselves struggling to stay together. The eerie whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was alive and mocking them. Mark, who had been leading the group, suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, eyes wide with fear. They all listened intently. At first, there was nothing but the oppressive silence. Then, faintly, they heard it a soft, almost melodic humming, like a lullaby carried on the wind. "It's coming from over there," Sarah pointed towards the darkest part of the forest. Despite their fear, they followed the sound, hoping it would lead them to safety. Instead, it led them deeper into the heart of the woods, where the trees grew so dense that even the fog struggled to penetrate. In the gloom, they stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin, barely visible through the thick underbrush. The humming grew louder, emanating from within. Summoning their courage, they approached the door. Chapter 4: The Cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The source of the humming was now clear, an old gramophone spinning an ancient, scratched record. The haunting melody filled the cabin, echoing off the walls. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath misted in the cold air, and a sense of foreboding washed over them. The cabin was filled with old, rotting furniture and cobwebs that seemed to glisten in the weak light. Sarah noticed a photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed a group of hikers, similar to their own, standing in front of the same cabin. The date on the photo was from decades ago, and the faces in the picture were marked with the same terror that Sarah felt now. "We need to get out of here," she whispered, but as she turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the cabin. Panic set in. They pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The humming grew louder, more distorted, as if the gramophone were mocking their plight. Suddenly, the air grew thick with whispers, unintelligible and maddening. The walls seemed to close in, and shadows danced in the corners of their vision. The cabin itself felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. "There's no way out," Mark's voice broke, his fear palpable. "No, there has to be," Sarah insisted, fighting to stay calm. "Look for anything, a window, a trapdoor." As they frantically searched, Sarah found a trapdoor hidden beneath a tattered rug. They pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. With no other option, they climbed down, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the whispers grew louder, more frenzied. Chapter 5: The Final Descent. The staircase led to a small, dank basement. The air was thick with mold and decay, and the only light came from a single, flickering bulb. In the center of the room stood an old, wooden table covered in dust and cobwebs. On it lay a map showing a maze of tunnels beneath the forest. "This must be a way out," Sarah said, grabbing the map. But as she did, the whispers intensified, and a cold wind swept through the basement, extinguishing the light. In total darkness, they fumbled to find their way. The map was their only guide, but the tunnels twisted and turned, each passage looking identical to the last. The air grew colder, and the whispers seemed to come from all directions, disorienting them. "We're going in circles," Mark said, panic rising in his voice. "No, we just have to keep moving," Sarah insisted, though her own fear was mounting. As they pressed on, the tunnels seemed to close in, the walls narrowing until they were forced to crawl. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the sense of being watched became unbearable. Finally, they saw a faint light ahead. Summoning their last reserves of strength, they crawled towards it, emerging into another clearing, similar to the one they had left. But something was different. The ancient tree still stood, its symbols glowing faintly in the dark. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a path leading out of the clearing. With renewed hope, they followed the path, their pace quickening as the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The whispers faded, and the forest began to feel like a forest again. They stumbled out of the woods, exhausted and shaken, but alive. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape. They collapsed on the ground, overwhelmed with relief. Epilogue: The Return. Weeks later, Sarah sat at her desk, trying to process their harrowing experience. She had spent countless hours researching the vanishing path and the strange occurrences in the forest. Her search led her to old newspaper articles and forgotten records, all hinting at a dark history of the trail. The most chilling discovery was an old diary entry, dated nearly a century ago, describing an encounter eerily similar to their own. The author had barely escaped with their life, warning future hikers of the path's dangers. Sarah knew she had to share their story, to warn others of the horrors they had faced. As she typed the final words of their tale, she felt a strange sense of closure. The forest had let them go, but its secrets remained. And so, the legend of the vanishing path grew, passed down from one generation of hikers to the next, a cautionary tale of the dangers lurking in the heart of nature. The Appalachian Trail, with all its beauty, held a darkness that few dared to explore. But for those who did, the forest never forgot.